Hello and welcome back to The Millennial and the Mom. I'm Maddie, the Millennial.
I'm Katie, the mom.
And Mom, are you so excited? Today's our very first book club episode.
I'm really excited. And I was excited that I got to actually read part of this book while I was around you. So I was like, I know you were ahead of me, but I was having my suspicions about what happened. And I kept
I
asking
know
you about it.
it's so much fun when you can talk about it with someone else. And so I think, that's what we're hoping to do in these episodes. Once a month, we're going to plan to release a book club episode. You can read the book along with us. We'll announce the book ahead of time on our Instagram. So you can be all caught up. And then, last Friday of every month, we'll go ahead and release these. If you have book suggestions or, you're in a book club and you've read some really great books, let us know. And, we're happy to take any recommendations. But for our July book, we read The Only Survivors by Megan Miranda. So, Mom, what did you think of the book?
I really like the book. I can be a little skeptical sometimes because I'm pretty tough on like this suspense mystery thriller genre because sometimes I feel like it builds and then the ending is like way too contrived, or it's just like all of a sudden it's just like everything's wrapped up. Okay, book is all over. I felt like
You
this
prefer it
one.
to be unsolved or like unfinished?
No. I don't want it to be unfinished, but I need a little bit of depth to the ending. I thought this one did an okay job with that, but I would say the tension and the build in this one, very good. I mean, I read it in like 2 days.
Yeah, I read it maybe I read it over the course of a week, but it was definitely a quick read. Have you read any other books by her?
I don't think so, but I don't know what are some of her other titles.
I read Such a Quiet Place, which was really good. And I think, just like you mentioned, how sometimes these types of books will build and build and build, and then you're kind of let down at the end. I didn't feel that way by Only Survivors, but I will say Such a Quiet Place had me much more on the edge of my seat than this one did. But it's the same type, and I don't know if all of her books are the same way. And she actually I don't know when it was released, but I picked this out for us to read because I was in Target and it looked really good. But she wrote another one recently called The Last to Vanish. And I think all of her style is kind of like, a lockbox mystery. Like it's all of the characters, and they all are kind of intertwined.
They're kind of stuck together in a situation.
Yeah. And Such a Quiet Place did the same thing as The Only Survivors, where you're going kind of back and forth in time, which I don't know. Not everyone likes when books do that. I actually think, if they do it well and it's not too hard to follow, I think it adds another layer of suspense, and you're not learning all of the clues at once. You kind of have to wait till you get to that point in the past and that point in the present, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I don't mind the back and forth between present day and the past. The only thing with this one, which was a little bit not necessarily confusing, but when she first started going to the past, it was more generic. And then she started going back from one character's perspective, unless I missed something.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah. So the present was all one person's perspective. It was all Cassie's perspective.
Right.
And then you're saying the past, they jumped around.
They jumped around, but I think there was also almost like what's that called when it's like an all-knowing perspective. I think when she first started introducing the past, it wasn't a specific character tied to the recollection, was it?
No, I think it was.
It was. Okay. Here's another thing to talk about. I read this on my Kindle, which I'm kind of doing for a purpose. I'm getting ready to take a big trip and I want to have all these books on it. But I prefer to read a book in the paper form because that very reason what I'm talking about. I want to go back and look at it and go, okay, wait, last time it was this person. Of course you can do that on a Kindle. It's just not as easy. The other thing that really
I hate reading on a Kindle.
Well,
I mean, as of now.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll change my mind.
The other thing that drives me crazy about the Kindle is you forget the title of the book you're reading because you never see it again. You move on from the title page and you're like in the book and you don't ever see the title again. So I'm like, okay, I read that book, but I can't remember what it was called.
Well, is that because you're reading multiple books at one time?
No, but when I open up my Kindle, it's just already at the book I'm reading.
But I mean, like I only read one book at a time. So I'm not like, oh, what book am I reading? Like I know.
No, but I just don't remember the name, right? I'm like,
I guess that's because you're not the millennial, you're advanced age.
Oh no, not the advanced age. No, it's just the eyesight going, not the memory yet. So
yeah, well, I like the change in perspective. I think it keeps it interesting. Sometimes I find, and I love to read thrillers or, mysteries. I also like a good beach read, like a rom-com type book. But I think it does help keep the book moving along when you're changing back and forth.
Well, it's a good way to learn background knowledge that it'd be kind of difficult to weave into the story. You can, the author can unveil a lot more about the character by doing the flashback.
No, I totally agree. And it's helpful too to get, I think at least in this book, the things you learn in the back or the past sections, like it's the only way you can understand the present. Right. Sometimes books will do it and you're learning like what kind of feels like irrelevant information. You're like, why? I don't, in the non-thriller ones, it's kind of like, oh, and now we're just going to go back in time and just get a different lens. And you're not really, it doesn't play any part in the plot. So I thought this one did a really good job with it. But I did pull together for our little book club. I did, pull some questions just in full transparency. I did not write any of these. They're from rotabook.com. We'll link it in the show notes if you're going to do a book club with this book and you need some inspiration. But Mom, I'm going to ask you the first question. It's kind of long.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
Okay. The premise of The Only Survivors revolves around a pack made by the survivors of a tragic accident. What do you think about the concept of survivor guilt and the ways in which the characters in the book cope with it?
Well, I think, first of all, are we going to have spoilers in this episode? I mean, what if someone listens to this that didn't read the book?
No, this whole episode is a spoiler.
Okay, I just want to make sure. So,
listeners, if you didn't read this book, turn off this podcast.
Turn it off, or
you won't hurt our feelings.
Right. Well, but the thing is, I don't know that survivor guilt is necessarily the right way to think about this, because yes, they did survive this tragic accident, but as we learn, it was more than just an accident. There were some other things that happened along the way. So it's like, are they really experiencing survivor's guilt, or are they really having guilt about being part of what essentially is a cover-up?
I was just going to say, so do you think this is a full spoiler alert. So, Cassidy is the one that caused the accident, but I don't think it was learning that. I don't think in my mind it was anything any less than an accident that they crashed.
No, I don't necessarily.
It was a freak accident.
Well, she didn't cause it. As someone,
she ran out in front of the van.
Right, but as someone who worked in education, if you're about ready to leave a student behind in the middle of the woods and you don't know you're missing them,
fault.
I'm not sure that. Listen, good for her. I was like, good, advocate for yourself. You're about ready to be left in the middle of nowhere. So yes, it was an accident. And she was the one that dashed out in front of it. But I would say the accident was really caused by the adults not taking the proper precautions along this trip, right? But yes,
it was a series of unfortunate events.
It was a series of, mistakes, right? I would say. They turned off the road without a plan. Now, she did, if you want to really go deep on Cassidy, she got car sick. It's not her fault. She's in the back of a van on a winding road. She needed a break and they stopped and let her out, and then they forgot her. But in the meanwhile, it's like, that's on the adults in the trip, right? So yes, it ends up being a tragic accident, but so much more happened than just the accident.
Yeah. Well, and I think all of the subsequent events, which I think is what a lot of the twists and turns kind of are in the book, which I wasn't expecting. I kind of thought it was going to turn out that there was something, more twisty than them hitting what, they're all talking about during the book. They're all hitting the deer, and it turns out the deer's Cassidy. I thought it was going to be something much more malicious, and like it was going to be that someone caused them to wreck, and it's the same person that's looking into the windows, or something really, that's just, my mind is so dark and twisty. That's what I went to before you start learning more about what goes on and how they all kind of have these secrets of the hours after the crash. But I think, everything that happens after they crash, to some extent, it's like, what's that book you all have to read, like Lord of the Flies or whatever? Like you don't know when you're in that situation, what your reaction is going to be,
Right.
what's going to go off in your mind. Like, there's the whole question of like, did Grace, have a knife, and did she kill, I'm blanking on the guy's name. Ben, did she kill Ben? And it's like, if she did, like, it could be that she just, she had a break with reality. Like, think they're going to die on the side of this river. Like, she lashed out because she thought he caused the wreck, whatever it is. Like, to some extent, like, I don't think they can be like held accountable necessarily to the full extent of whatever actions did occur.
Oh, no, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, the other one is, the whole story behind Cassidy, that she actually wasn't in the wreck, right? And then she jumps in and she saves people, and everybody, thinking like, oh, maybe she was so selfless in doing that. But again, she has a particular, angle on that. And then the other one I want to talk about is the guy jumping in the river, right? And was it Brody didn't want to go? And Jason,
I think it was Brody didn't know how to swim.
Right. But they had nobody really knew that. And he had already had that near drowning experience. And then they drew straws or cards or whatever. And he gets chosen, and then he freaks out. He can't go. And then that guy, Jason, gets in, and it's like, that's the end of Jason, No,
I know that was really, they're like, oh, like you're just like, oh my God, I can't even imagine.
I know. At the same time, I'm like, who thought that was going to be a good idea, getting in the water?
I know. And I wish, like, sometimes when you're reading, I feel like I could really conjure like a picture of the house they're staying at on the Outer Banks, and the motel they go to check for Amaya, and the old car she drives, all of that. Like, I feel like I could really conjure a picture of what I thought it looked like, or the restaurant they go to and, they're having their meals at. I could not picture this river. I was like, is it a flat river? Because it says they like go off the side. And so I'm like, okay, is it like, they're like going off a cliff and then there's a river running down? Like, I just couldn't picture what the river looked like.
Well, I think they must have gone off a cliff, because the way they ended up getting out was scaling up the wet, slippery cliff.
Yeah, because in my mind, I'm imagining like almost like a waterfall or whatever. And I'm like,
no, I don't think like that. I didn't see a
waterfall. Who would go swim like that? But okay, I guess if it's more of like a flat river down where you are.
Yeah.
It's one of those ones, like, if they make a movie out of it or something, I'm really curious to see what they do with the river.
Okay, this would make a really good movie.
I'm trying to think of any of her other books, because I thought the same thing about Such a Quiet Place. I was like, oh man, this was twisty. But sometimes I feel like the filmmakers maybe think it's hard when the book goes back and forth in time. Like, how do you capture that?
Filmmakers need to figure that out. They make all these other things. If you can make all the special effects, you can figure out going back and forth in time. But it very well could be that someone has turned this into a script, and eventually we'll see this as a movie. I don't know. But I think it would make a good movie. So, you know what? It's so funny. And I don't know if we're going to get to this in a question, but talking about, not seeing the ending or whatever, the entire book, I was expecting Will to have some sort of sinister role.
Yes, I thought he was going to be the one who killed Ian, like plants his phone, gets on Cassidy's, and that was kind of anticlimactic to me. Like, he was clearly just a supporting character.
I know, but I think that was so good, the way that I just was always suspecting Will. And then again, spoiler alert, I didn't see Russ coming at all. Russ slapped me across the face when that thing happened. I was like, and again, I wish I was reading the paper book, because I kind of wanted to go back and remind myself why Russ, like her intro story with Russ, because she kind of talked about it, I think, at the beginning.
Yeah, and I get, like, she said, because she texts Grace the photo of Russ, or the photo, and was like, who is this? And she's like, that's Clara's older brother. And I get, like, someone being 4 years older than you, but if this was such a pivotal moment in your childhood and all of that, like, you're telling me you never saw Clara's older brother? Like, I don't know. It felt a little bit kind of like
I thought that too.
I don't know if this is plausible.
I know. You know what? I did think that too. Although as someone who went to a very small high school with like 100 people in my graduating class, and it was like people, had siblings. I mean, you kind of knew the families. I'm not sure 10 years later if I would pick out someone's sibling. I mean, I probably couldn't pick out necessarily the 100 people I graduated with, let alone 10 years later, realizing that somebody I met was like a sibling that much older or younger than the person that I kind of knew at the time.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm 8 years out from my high school graduation.
Oh my God, are you 8 years out of high school?
I know. Isn't that crazy?
Oh my.
That's why I'm the millennial. I'm not Gen Z.
I get it. I get it. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. That felt a little bit odd. But I do think, I don't know if I would have been more satisfied if it would have been Will. To me, it felt like again, like we did our whole episode on true crime. Like I'm just a really twisty person, I guess. Like,
yeah.
To me, it was more like, maybe this was her whole point, is like in her book, the other book I read by her was kind of the same thing. It's like, it's almost a logical explanation. Everything kind of makes sense in the end. It's not that any one person was so terrible that they did this bad thing. It's not like Russ was so awful that he conjured up this whole stalking thing he was going to do. Like, he was really upset by his sister's death. He thought one of them played a part in it, and he was trying to figure out, like, he kept telling them, like, I'm not going to hurt you. Like, I'm not going to kill you. Or
I mean, that might be a little hard to believe when someone has a gun pointed at you. I mean, I'm not buying it.
But I don't know. And the other book by her was the same thing. It's like, when people are put in terrible situations, they do unthinkable things. But I think in my mind, I'm like, oh, like, it could have been like a random serial killer who like is stalking them. And like, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay,
I thought that's where this book was going to go.
Right. Okay. What do you think Grace's role was in Clara's death?
Okay, Grace threw me for a loop because she's the one who's like now a counselor, and she's giving people all these coping mechanisms. And I was like, okay, I get it. Like, she went through something really traumatic, and she, it's like, was it Josh no, Josh was a lawyer. Who was the EMT?
Brody.
Brody was the EMT. It's like same kind of thing as Grace. So, like, they went through something terrible. They used it to, help others later in their life. Brody's the EMT. She's a counselor or a therapist. And so I had no idea until like it started kind of foreshadowing that she had this darkness in her or whatever, that she was going to play any type of part in that. I thought she was just kind of this like fluff character. And I thought Amaya, she ended up, I guess she did play a big role in it, but I thought it was going to be much more like she was having an active part in the story. I don't feel like she did.
No, I mean, I feel like I know Amaya the least, right? Because she was always in the shadows. So I don't know that I totally understand all the connections with Amaya. It's more like the book was more about her absence rather than her presence.
So yeah, so you are leading us. We're going to skip a couple questions, just going with the flow.
Okay.
But how does the disappearance of Amaya affect the dynamics of the remaining characters? How do their suspicions and fears escalate? And do you think their reactions are justified?
I felt like this is something that could have been a little bit more well developed. I'm not sure that Amaya was really established enough when she disappeared for me to understand, should I miss her? Is she just being like petulant? Is she just, needing her own space? And I do think in some ways, some of the characters' reactions to her disappearing, I don't know that I had enough at that point in the book to really understand why they were acting like that. Why was it such a big deal?
No, I feel the same way. And one of the questions that we skipped so we could do this one was, if you had a similar situation in your childhood, would you want to commemorate it with a week-long trip every year? And I definitely wouldn't. Like, again, you don't know how you're going to react in that situation. But I feel like 10 years later, I would want to be moving on with my life. Like, be grieving in my own way. I don't need to go sit at a beach house for a week and think about the terrible things we may have done. And every person kind of doesn't have the full picture and they don't talk about it. Like, sounds awful.
Listen, I mean, I went to high school with some great people, but I don't want to go on a week-long trip with them, even if I didn't have a traumatic experience. I mean, move on, right? It's like, yeah, some people are friends and but I don't know if that trip was conceived or the inertia around that trip was to ensure that everybody was still on board with sticking with the story.
No, I agree. The trip was not because they like loved each other so much they wanted
Or
to go
because
on.
it wasn't really because they were working through their, trauma together.
It was to make sure that nothing like Clara's suicide happened to anyone else. But so going back to Amaya is, if it's been so planned and it's something you do every year, and then the person who organizes it leaves the trip, like I just feel like they weren't worried enough. Or I just feel like if that was me, like I wouldn't have let her go for days.
Well, I don't know, because I feel like they were talking about how she does this, right? Like she's done this before. She needs her space. She disappears. Now it did go on. And we haven't even talked about the fact that it's Oliver, right? Who has the house. That was not that well developed, because Will hinted at the fact, well, I mean, he came around and said it. The house is only used for this trip, right? It sits empty the rest of the year. But when that was addressed in the book, it was more like, oh, we just don't happen to rent it out anymore. I bought it for my parents. But it's not really ever discussed. There's a lot of hanging threads around the house and Will. Mm-hmm. I mean, I go back to Will. Will needs his own book.
Yeah, and they say there's like ghosts in it, or they call it Ghost House, or I think that's their name for it.
Right.
So I agree. I think at various points, I definitely suspected Will. I don't think I ever really suspected Oliver, even though I think at points in the story, she's trying to lead you to thinking Oliver's doing something. Like he gets there early.
Right.
But I think at each step, like his explanations make sense. But I think they stayed in that house so much longer than I would have. If like I'm hearing things, and then I think it was Josh's medication goes missing, and Cassidy finds that note that says "Get out."
Yeah,
I'm like,
what was that about?
Why are we here?
Who wrote that note?
I think it was Russ.
Russ wrote the note?
Or maybe it was Ian wrote it before. But no, because they put it on Amaya's bed. I think it had to have been Russ.
I thought it was Amaya maybe who wrote it.
As like a warning.
But you know what?
Cassidy.
It was, okay, maybe you're right, because Russ...
Because they planted Ian's... I mean, he planted Ian, or Ian's phone had to show up somehow.
Right. He planted Ian's phone. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the house to me seems problematic for a lot of reasons, right? I might have been out of there. But then, of course, now here's the one thing is Russ could not have timed the storm. So how does the storm, and that gets to one of your other questions on the list. It's like the setting in terms of the Outer Banks, it's looming storm, closed roads, all of that. I think that plays such a huge role in the tension of the story. Mm-hmm. How did you feel about that setting?
No, I love like a Nicholas Sparks, or, those books, they're all set in the Outer Banks, North Carolina. It's just like a spooky place. I don't know. And actually the fact that I lived in North Carolina for a year and a half, and I spent the summer there before I graduated from college, like I never went to the Outer Banks. And I just feel like it's such like it's like an ominous setting. It's just those like southern beaches where you're just like, I don't know, there's places to hide. It's a little bit, I feel like anytime I think about it, it's like ominous. And
you don't have to tell me. I always think about that movie, Cape Fear. I'm terrified of that movie. And that's all I can think about. I never went to the Outer Banks, and I'm really kicking myself because we lived in North Carolina for a few years. So I definitely have to go there. I mean, I'm sure it's beautiful, but that storm coming in, that was like a whole nother almost character in the story, was the weather, the setting, the closed
Well, and it's also too because it's playing off their fears of the river, and it's raining and the rushing water and all of that. So it's kind of like, I think Megan Miranda does such a good job with it is like I said earlier, like everything had a relatively rational explanation, but all of the factors combined lead you like to get so like, whoa, like what's happening? Like you have the storm, you have weird things going missing, you have, people like feeling on edge and everything. And some of it's like a lot of like man-made. The characters are doing it to themselves. It's not like there's some other spooky force out there. Like it's just there was a storm and, there was creaks in the house, all of that. But I thought the setting definitely helped the storyline feel suspenseful, because if it had just been a normal weekend and there had been no weather, there'd been no road closures, the element of like what's going to happen next would have not been there.
Right. And I think it's like juxtaposing it with the same weather of when the accident occurred. Right. But no, I think the setting played a really, really strong role. And I think, like you said earlier, it was really easy. The picture she painted of the house, the beach, the motel, the restaurant that they went to. So I could really visualize being there.
No, I definitely could. So one of the questions we skipped was, the characters in the story seem to grapple with tragedies on their own without seeking outside help. If the characters had involved the police or sought professional assistance, how do you think the story would have unfolded differently?
I don't know. I was thinking about that. I mean, what if they had just confessed? I mean, I don't even want to say confess, right? Because I don't truly know what happened with Ben. I don't know what the rescue was like. Like, was Ben found? I mean, did they examine him and be like, oh, he has a stab wound? Well, it must have been like a branch or something. I don't know. I mean, what would have been the repercussions of that? But in terms of seeking outside help, I mean, didn't she say that all those journals she wrote was because a therapist encouraged her to write them down? I mean, it seems like they have, in their own way, some of them had some sort of therapy. Wasn't that true about Cassidy?
Yeah, she definitely said she wrote the journals or that's what she told people, that she had written them at the suggestion of a therapist.
Yeah.
But I think, and I feel like I may be glazed over it. Sometimes I tend to like not read all the words on a page. It's a bad habit I have when I'm reading books. But I feel like I don't necessarily understood, they get out of the river, they're found by that truck driver. At what point is the law firm coming in and saying, this is your story? They must have initially, did just no one talk when they got picked up? Like, it wasn't like the law firm knew what happened before they got back and they could, herd them all into one spot before they could talk to the police. Like, they must have made that pact before they got in the truck to rescue them. Like,
yeah. And I don't know what the role, I mean, I know the law firm ultimately kept their secret and knew their secret, but you're right. I don't understand how they orchestrated that it was all, that they all had the same story and they didn't reveal anything.
It leads me to believe they must have not found Ben.
Well, I'm kind of wondering how many of them they actually found, right? I mean,
it definitely sounds like the first van essentially washed away.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm sure that they got these bodies out of the river.
Yeah, but
it's a river. It's not like the Black Sea or something. They should be able to like find these bodies, don't you think? I don't know. Yeah. Maybe we need to listen to more true crime involving like bodies being dumped in rivers to understand what actually happens. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, and again, that's some of the leaps. I mean, you've got to take some leaps in this book in terms of, what's plausible and what actually could happen. But I think, in terms of seeking the outside help and professional assistance, I think that's more of an issue, not an issue, but that's more pertinent when you think about the issues that Clara and Ian ran into. Yeah. It's like, why did they suffered in silence, which I mean, sadly is true for a lot of people. I mean, obviously suicide is not, a new topic. But again, it's one of those things where you think, and Ian had, obviously he had substance abuse issues and, likely a direct result of the burden of this tragedy they went through and the secrets that they were being asked to keep. So again, you think about how might they have been better helped, and really how might the school have better helped them. I mean, to have them, I don't want to say paraded around, but they had to go to all these funerals. Now, as Cassidy says, not everybody did. I mean, people were dropping off, but you're in somewhat of a small town. You're having this tragedy play out. You're seeing all these, funerals, feeling like you've got to go and bear the burden of this as a survivor. And then even with the, memorial, the ringing of the bells, the dedication of the library. I mean, in some ways you can't get away from it. And that's what Cassidy tried to do, is try to get away from it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's interesting that I assume Grace, who, has this darkness in her and she's kind of becomes an integral part of the plot later on, but she's now a therapist and she's doing her sessions while they're at the house, and she's telling that one person, like, you're not the worst thing that you've done, which leads me to believe, like, she sought counseling at some point, like, like, to get to a point where you're able to provide that, sounding board to others. But I think, the police aspect is interesting. And I do think, it's a small town. This sounds like it happened in, like, rural Tennessee. Like, to some extent, if you find 7 or 8 bodies in a river, like, you don't question it. You're like, this was a terrible accident. These people drowned.
Yeah.
Who knows if they did find Ben, how much time had passed, if you were able to tell it was like a clean cut stab wound from, like, a knife and not a tree, like you said, or the windshield or whatever else could have been a factor in finding him. So maybe they were like, it's the simplest explanation. Like, they careened off the road. That's what happened. And they didn't even ask any questions because they knew they were kids or teens. But I think you
didn't have the teachers there to share any perspective on what had happened. And that's the other thing too. I mean, I think one interesting question would be, what would have happened if one of the teachers had survived? Especially the one, I mean, do you think Grace had something with that teacher, or was it just her infatuation?
I think it was probably just her infatuation. And I think, to your question of what would have happened if the teachers were there, I mean, I don't think anything would have come of this story to some extent. Like, it's not like if Grace did kill Ben, I don't think she would have done it in front of a teacher.
Well, but not necessarily right there when it happened, but what if the van, I mean, only one van swerved to avoid Cassidy. The other one just was a bystander. I mean, that just happened because the first one did a domino effect. So if the teacher of that van had survived, they wouldn't know that it was necessarily Cassidy that had jumped in front. I mean, so I'm wondering how much of the story could have still held together, even if, other people had survived. Certainly the issue with Ben, but not everybody was around and saw even what happened to Ben.
No, they were all in various parts of the riverbank.
Right.
But what you just said, that raises one of our other questions, is which lie do you think had the most significant impact on the course of the story? If Cassidy had initially confessed to the group that she was standing in front of the bus during the accident, how do you think it would have altered the events of the story?
I don't know. I mean, I have to go back and remind myself of the timing of everything. Again, it wasn't Cassidy's fault that she had to, like, get the attention of the van, that she was being left behind. So
no, but I think at some points in the story, and when they're in the past and they're in the river and they're all freaking out and they're all asking, like, what happened, because that's the whole part with Grace and Ben, is Grace thinks that Ben did something to the teacher who was driving, and
that's true.
Like, I saw you had the knife, and so but I do think they might have turned on Cassidy at that point. Like, you caused this horrific event and this is your fault. We're in the wilderness drowning in the river right now.
Which would have been ironic because she's the one that jumped in and saved quite a few people.
Yeah. No, I think it would have been a totally different story. I think in terms of the most significant lie, I don't think it was Cassidy's. I think that maybe is what led the most significant impact on the story is Cassidy jumped in front of the van. Otherwise, she would have been left. Who knows what would have happened to Cassidy, but you might not have had 10 other or 9 other people die, whatever it was. But I think the most significant lie was, I don't know.
Grace obviously covered up a lot. So, I mean, Grace And then I don't know with Amaya, how much did Amaya initially kind of orchestrate things with her family, with the law firm?
No, I agree. And then it comes out that Josh had seen Ian and they had been more friends. And
yeah.
So I think, I don't know if anyone had the most or the biggest impact on it. Probably Russ lying that he was not Clara's brother.
Completely. But I mean, it's like, it's the old story, right? It's like, it's never just one lie. It's a lie that leads you to tell another lie, and then you become stuck in this web. But you know what I'm just thinking about when the river rescue part? I'm thinking about the character of Hollis. Let's talk about her, because it's so interesting. She was separate from the other group, right? I mean, as she kind of came upon all of them. And she was one of the more mysterious characters, even at the house. I feel like we know very little about her.
Yeah, I agree. And she's, she was Brody's high school girlfriend, and Brody, they had a fight, and, you can say that maybe played into Brody's emotions while he was there on the riverbank. But I agree. And I think Hollis is, of all of the survivors, it felt like she played the smallest role.
Yeah, I agree.
In the rest of the story too, because it's like, obviously Ian and Claire passed away, and those are integral to, it's like, did Grace kill Clara? Did Ian overdose, or did someone kill him? Like, those are really, they're not in the story, but they're central to the plot of it. And then you have Oliver, who's hiding the fact that no one uses this house other than when they're there, and he came in a day early, and he's just kind of being mysterious regardless. And then, Josh is dating Amaya, or was dating her, and Brody can't sleep. And so there's all these other questions, but Hollis is really just kind of steady, even keel.
Well, and the only thing that I thought was like very out of place in the story is when Hollis and, was it Josh or Brody, were out in the ocean swimming, and something like got her foot.
Yes.
But suddenly I was like, wait, am I reading a science fiction? Like, is there like a creature out there? But that really wasn't anything.
I think it was just kind of like we mentioned with the storm and all of that. I think it was just meant to unsettle you. It was like, there are omens out here in the beach.
But that kind of unsettled me in a weird way. I was like, okay, we're not going like for some like, Creatures of the Black Lagoon kind of story here, are we? Whereas the other ones, like the note and the cameras and stuff, that was different. But I wasn't really thinking like, oh, somebody's really out there underneath the water, like trying to get you.
No, I didn't necessarily either, but I think it was more so just like, okay, what's to come? Is something going to wash up? Like, I think they maybe even hinted to like, could the vans have ended up in the ocean?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I think it was more so just to make you feel unsettled.
Okay.
But I guess, so how do you think, like we were just talking about, how do you think the author crafted the mystery elements in the story to keep the readers engaged and intrigued?
I think there were a lot of little breadcrumbs that were dropped along the way. And I think as a reader, you had to kind of actively work to kind of keep those together. And there were some red herrings, right? I mean, again, that thing that happened out in the ocean, there were some distractions. And I think I personally felt like the author did a great job of distracting us with Will and some other possible people who could have been behind it. And like I said, if I think back to it, I mean, there was little things dropped about Russ along the way, but I didn't really pay attention to him. I was just like, oh, that's just this guy. And she's just like pulling the wool over his eyes because she wanted to go to this, this week-long thing that she didn't want to tell him. I wasn't thinking he had any role at all. I hadn't really paid attention to him.
No, I didn't either. And I think some of the most intriguing elements, it's like the fact that Cassie, it's like you're finding it out at the end, like the fact that Cassie wrote all of this in her journal, that she was the one who dove in front of the van. But some of the ones in the beginning, like her finding that phone, and then like I did have like a moment of like, oh my God, like when it turns on and she texts it and it lights up, and I'm like, oh my God, like how did this phone get here? When she finds that note that says get out, like all of that, I feel like kept me being like, what's going to happen next?
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much that it was like so like, twisted and all of that. It was more so just like there were so many small elements. And then it's like they go and they can't find Amaya at the motel, but her car is there. And it just, all of it was just kind of eerie. It was
well,
not
and
scary,
I thought the part when they were like, pop the trunk, and I was like, oh God, please don't let her be in the trunk.
Yes, I had the same thought.
Probably because we've listened to too many true crimes that have had people in the trunk.
I'm thinking of a crime junkie where they find, unfortunately, someone in the trunk of the car. But no, I thought it was a really, I mean, I don't know. Were you satisfied with the ending? I thought it was a really good book.
Yes, I was satisfied enough with the ending. It was a good book. The reason I know it was good is there's times when I really did read fast and kind of skim because I was so anxious to see what happened. Mm-hmm. Not because I didn't want to pay attention to it, but I was like, oh my God, okay, wait, what's happening? What's happening? And I'm like trying to read quickly to get to the next part. So I was satisfied with the ending. That being said, I'm not sure I totally understand. I mean, I understand Russ ended up dead at the end, but I don't know what story they are crafting around what happened at the end.
Well, I think you're left with several unanswered questions. It's first of all, what happened to Ben? And then the question I think that's more eerie and I wish, there had been something was, did Grace kill Clara? Like you can say, she acted in a moment of, she thought they were going to die out there. And she was so mad at Ben. She stabbed him. Maybe she didn't mean to hurt him, all of that. But then the question of like, did she push Clara? And it's also this weird, I mean, think about Clara's parents. Like both their kids died falling off the same cliff. Like it's just eerie.
Right. Well, now the thing is though, it did say something like, Grace went on to become a trauma therapist because she wanted to be able to better help. She didn't feel like she was able to help Clara. So maybe she didn't. I mean, maybe I want to just assume, positive intent that she came upon Clara, and she wasn't able to save her. But at the same time, maybe if we really go with the dark side of Grace, maybe Grace really orchestrated Clara. I mean, maybe she drove her out there or, said things to her, suggested things that caused Clara to do what she did. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest unanswered question for me. I can live with not knowing what happened to Ben. I just chalk it up to no one was in their right mind. But I think that was a big one. And then two, like, I just, do they keep with the storyline? Like they just don't tell anyone. And it just feels like that's the burden now is so great on the rest of the survivors. It's like, how can they keep going like with all of these secrets they're hiding? Well,
and that's the thing is like, somebody's going to slip up. It's a little bit like Cassidy, right? She meets this guy, Russ, and somehow he knows she's got these journals. And even, I mean, Cassidy, actually thinking back to Will, I mean, she ended up spilling too much to Will, much more than the other people would have wanted her to say. And then he finds the link to the story and says, oh, is this you? And that's where I was like, oh my God, okay, it is going to be Will, or it's going to be something with Will. But it really wasn't. And then she, of course, denied it. So, I mean, I think it was an entertaining book. It's not, like fine fiction per se. Interesting thing though, if we talk about book clubs, this being our book club, do you think there's enough to talk about I'm thinking about my book club. They tend to choose a little bit more meaty books, but I do think the whole idea around what would you do, how would you handle that would lead to an interesting discussion.
Are you saying our book club wasn't in depth enough?
No, I think it's great. I'm just saying, some book clubs like to think they're a little bit, more hoity-toity with more,
No, I think it was a book that, it's to some extent, it's not based off a true story. I don't remember the page count. It wasn't terribly long. It was we both read it. We're recording this at the end of May so that we can be ready for July because we're, at this point, a new podcast. So we got to have the content ready. But we both read it like within a week.
Yes.
I've read some books that really, it takes me a couple weeks to finish because I just don't feel pulled to read them every night.
This is not one of those books. You want to read it and finish it.
Quick read. Yes. It was a quick read. So I think to some extent, it's not going to be that big in-depth discussion. Like, I guess, I don't know, you could take a step back and say, like, you were in Grace's shoes, what would you have done?
Mm-hmm.
If you were in Cassidy's shoes, what would you have done? But I think at the end of the day, it's just like they were a bunch of teenagers and shit happened and they handled it really poorly.
I mean, yes, although they survived. So who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think the fact that they even got out alive, it says a lot about them. But the burden...
I think it says a lot about Cassidy. She jumped in.
Yeah.
And was, first of all, able to not get swept away by the river and was able to pull people out of vans. And I didn't get the sense that Cassidy was this like strongly built girl.
Right. Okay, so if they make it into a movie, who should play the characters?
I don't know. I feel like, I kind of get the vibe from Oliver. I think they said he was Korean or he was Korean American.
Mm-hmm.
I might be making that up, but I see him as maybe the guy, the main guy from Crazy Rich Asians.
Okay, true.
I see Hollis as almost like and I know they said she had dyed hair, so maybe not, like a Blake Lively, or she's just like really fit.
Yeah,
kind of mysterious.
The funny thing is, though, now I realized after I asked that question, I'm only going to be able to think of actors that are like in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And we don't know enough. Well, I don't know enough anymore about actors who are actually more like late teens, early 20s who could play these people.
Yeah. I don't know who would play Cassidy.
I can picture her, but I don't know who would be the actress. I do think it'd make a great movie. I hope it comes out in a movie.
I think of Brody as Drew, my husband, really likes all of the Chicago series, like Chicago Fire, Chicago PD. And Severide from Chicago Fire. He's like a burly kind of he's a beard. He's an EMT.
Okay, I see.
If you gave me enough time, I could cast him.
Okay.
But just funny side note, just because I did mention Blake Lively. So if you've listened to our early episodes, I got a ton of shit from my husband and my sisters for saying the town I live in. So I live in Hoboken, New Jersey, and they're filming. I haven't read it. It's on my list of books to read. It's the Colleen Hoover books. They're filming the movie. They're either filming It Ends With Us or It Starts With Us. I think It Ends With Us, and they're filming it, and Blake Lively's in it. And they've been filming like 2 blocks from where I live in Hoboken. And I guess I've been seeing all over Instagram. I've not read the book. I have no skin in the game, but everyone is so pissed at how they cast. Not that it's Blake Lively, but how they've styled her. Oh. And I guess it's like no one thinks that's what she would have looked like. She was kind of like, and I saw this. My husband and I were going to dinner, and I was like, we were going to be so late, and I made a stand in front of the filming place for like 10 minutes because there's a crowd on the street, and they'd been filming outside of this multi-purpose building that has actually had a couple movies filmed in it since we've lived here. But I kept waiting for Blake Lively to come out, but you could kind of tell the vibe just from seeing the outside of it. And I guess she's cast as kind of this like dowdy, not put together girl. And everyone's so mad. So I think it's like, I don't know.
I wonder if they're mad because the character doesn't come across that way in the book, or because how in the hell would you make Blake Lively dowdy and not put together?
No, I think they're mad because they like envisioned her just totally different. So,
okay.
I mean, we're not Hollywood screen.
But you know what? That has happened recently, though. Like, I don't know if you read Where the Crawdads Sing. I haven't seen the movie because the trailers of it, I'm like, I'm sorry, but the girl in this book, Where the Crawdads Sing, is never going to look that good as she does in this movie. Like this, and I know people have this, kind of mismatch between the book and the movie, which is somewhat typical. But it's also is going to be interesting because The Last Thing He Told Me, which is another book that I read, and it's now like a limited series. I think it's on Netflix. Mm-hmm. Did you watch it?
No, I haven't watched it, but someone I work with is friends with the author, and she got to go to this event in the city they had, and the author was there with Jennifer Gardner, and I think Reese Witherspoon was maybe there too. They were talking about the series and all of that. So I read the book, but I have not yet watched the Apple TV series.
It would be interesting. Oh, it's on Apple TV. It'd be interesting because that's a book they took and they made into a limited series, right? And that seems to be more of the movement these days, rather than like making, like a film or like a, 2-hour movie. But I do think this book, The Only Survivors, would do well as a limited series because you could kind of have something happen at the beach house, and then have the flashback and then stop that episode. And then the next episode, back at the beach house, have the flashback. So I think it would lend itself to be a series. Maybe I should become like a TV producer and I can start doing things like this.
Well, let's just start with podcast hosts before we start dabbling in other areas. I tell people all the time that I consume, and we talked about this in our true crime episode, like I would love to write one of these mysteries, just make it so twisty and keep everyone on their edge of their seat. And like, I've consumed enough content where if I put my mind to it, I could probably come up with something.
Okay, why don't you? I'm trying to write a book too. So challenge on.
Okay, you guys, come back in 5 years and my thriller will be done.
Okay, so the book club in 2028 will have 1 month the book club be the book you wrote and 1 month be the book I wrote.
Yeah, you heard it.
I'm here for it, 2028.
Speak your dreams. But this was so much fun. We've not yet picked our August book yet. If you have any suggestions, let us know. We'll probably do something a little bit lighter because this one was kind of a thriller. So maybe we'll need a little summer beach read, but let us know of any suggestions. You can check us out on Instagram. We're at The Millennial and the Mom, and come back on Wednesday for our regular scheduled episode.
All right. Well, Maddie, I'm glad this got us reading and it got us talking about the book, which, as a former teacher, I love anything that gets people reading and talking about books. So it's much better. Let's put it this way. Nobody should be doing a cereal box book report about a book like this. When you read a great book, you want to talk about it. What's a cereal box book report? Oh my God. You're too young. Didn't you ever have to take a cereal box and like make a book report on it with like a different thing on each side of the cereal box?
I definitely did book reports. I don't remember having to put them on cereal boxes.
Book reports are, they're bad. I don't think we should be doing book reports anymore.
Should we do what I had to do in second grade, which was all of the animal reports? I
think that's a whole episode.
We can save that. We'll save that for. I won't even tease it anymore. We'll go through my experience as a second grader.
As a self-directed second grader. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this was so much fun. Enjoy the rest of your Friday, and we'll catch you next week.
All right. Keep reading. Bye.
Bye, Mom.
Bye.